All right, so we're going to go ahead and move forward in our topic of probability, and we're going to discuss probability of simple events. So go ahead and set up the left-hand side of your journal. Our objective is to determine the theoretical probability of an event and determine whether an event is likely, unlikely, or neutral. So right now that sounds like a bunch of math words that makes no sense, but let's go ahead and get started after we set up our journals. So we did a little bit of theoretical probability last class where we determined the probability of pulling an A from a bag, flipping tails on a coin, or rolling a 2 on a spinner. So the way to represent probability is using the letter P. And then in parentheses, you're going to put what you want the probability of. So let's say I want the probability of rolling tails on a coin. So I have probability of tails. Now, on a coin, I have two options, right? It's either heads or tails. And out of those two options, only one of them has tails. So my theoretical probability would be 1 over 2. My probability of getting heads would be the same thing, right? There's two sides to a coin and only one of those sides has a head on it. So these are my theoretical probability. Now, there's multiple ways that you can represent probability, and that's something that's really important for us to realize, right? I can convert a fraction to a decimal, right? So if I were to put in the calculator 1 divided by 2, I would get 0.5. And the way I convert that to a percent is by moving my decimal point 2 places over, so I would get 50%, okay? And it's the same thing with the probability of getting a flipping heads. So we need to understand that probability can be represented in three ways. It can be represented as a fraction, it can be represented as a decimal, or as a percent. All three are perfectly fine. Okay, so let's look at example 1. You do not need to copy down the question, just copy down the work, okay? So, or actually copy down these numbers here so you have them in your notes. It says that for the past 3 months, Sydney recorded the number of eggs that her hen laid each week. The results are as follows: 4, 3, 5, 4, 6, 4, 5, 4, 3, 5, 7, and 6. So every week, her hen laid these varying amounts of eggs. It says approximate the probability that the hen will lay exactly 5 eggs next week. Now, the vocabulary when reading a probability problem is really important because here it says exactly. So do we want to know anything above or below 5? We don't. We want to know exactly 5. So we want to know the probability of laying 5 eggs. So here's how we're going to do that. Well, I need to know the total number of times that we counted. So we counted 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 times. And I counted all of these particular numbers right here to figure out that we counted for 12 weeks. So I'm going to put as my denominator a 12. Now I need to figure out how many of those 12 are 5, the number 5. So I have 1 here, 2, 3. 3 out of 12, okay? Now, can this be simplified? Of course. I can divide both numbers by 3. And when I divide both numbers by 3, I'm left with a 1 on the top and a 4 on the bottom. So my probability is 1 over 4. Now, when I convert that, I'm going to get 0.25 or 25%. So all 3 of these answers are perfectly fine. You just need to make sure that you know how to represent them in all 3 ways. Now it says, what is the probability that her hen laid 3 eggs? Okay, so let's go ahead and figure that out. So probability of laying 3 eggs. Well, I already knew in the past problem that she counted for 12 weeks, so I know my denominator is 12. And now I'm going to look for when she laid 3 eggs. So we got 1, 2 times, which is a 2 over 12, and I can simplify both terms by 2, and I'm left with 1 over 6. Now here's a trick question. What is the probability that her hen laid 1 egg? Okay, let's think about that. What is the probability that her hen laid 1 egg? Well, you know what? I didn't have to erase my denominator because, again, I know that it's going to be out of 12 weeks, right? Now, is there any week that she actually laid one egg? No, there isn't. There was never a time that her hen laid one egg. Her hen is able to lay 3 or more eggs. So the probability of her laying one egg is 0. And when you simplify 0 over 12, it's just going to be 0. And whenever we have a probability of 0, we say that that is impossible. Okay? If something can never happen, then it's impossible. So in this case, we would call this situation the possibility of laying one egg, is 0 or impossible. All right, so I want you to go ahead and take a minute to copy this down in your notes, so that way you can understand what is considered impossible and what is considered possible or certain. And the word certain in terms of probability, as you'll see right here, means it is 100% going to happen. You are 100% going to come to school. You are 100% going to sit in a chair when you're in the iPrep classroom. So there are just certain things that absolutely are going to happen, and that's why you have a probability of 1, meaning it's absolutely going to happen. Now, if it is in the middle, that usually means 1/2 or 50%. There's a 50% chance of it happening. And the likely is usually around the likely is around 75%, and unlikely is 25%. Now, if anything is less than 25%, then it's considered unlikely. There's really not that much of a chance for it to happen. And if it's greater than 75, then it's considered likely. There's a good chance that will happen. Now, if it's in the middle, it's neutral. You're like, there's a good chance it might be heads. There's a good chance it might be tails. You can't really tell. It's like 50-50, all right? So go ahead and copy this down, and then we'll be able to move forward. Now, a couple of things that I want to note before we move forward is probabilities are between 0 and 1, okay? They can't be greater than 1. They can't be less than 0. So negative probabilities are not a thing. And 1.5, 2, 100, those are not probabilities because they're greater than 1. So that's really important for you to know, because I noticed on some of our theoretical and experimental probability sheets, we put that probabilities were 10 or 14, things like that. But those are not probabilities. They need to be between 0 and 1. It cannot be greater and it cannot be less than that, okay? All right, go ahead and work with your iPrep facilitator on the next part of the video, which is understanding what is likely and unlikely.